Okay, so great insights from Cyrus there. We're going to flip the order of our next presentation. We're going to go to Nikhil Kapur. Nikhil is the partner at Strive, which is a venture capital firm, and we're going to have a discussion, Nikhil, about investing in the API infrastructure layer. So I think there have been a lot of relevant points earlier in the day about this open finance or API infrastructure in general. And I'm very pleased to have you here. Why not start by just sort of introducing yourself a little bit and what Strive do and why it's so important for APIs.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, John, for having me. Yeah, let me give you a quick introduction about Strive. We're a Asia-wide VC. We invest seed to Series A stage in B2B tech companies, especially a lot in the developer infrastructure layer as well as SaaS companies. We've been around for close to 8 years now in the region. Backed some of the very early startups in the region like Bukalapak, Kudo, etc., which Bukalapak went public recently. In the last few years, we've done a lot of work in the infrastructure layer, and done a lot of investments, IO Connect, etc. Some names, some of them are even speaking in this conference. And we do this work across Japan, Southeast Asia, and India. So I think we sit at this kind of unique vantage point where we can see, some developed markets like Japan, which have, let's say, a bit more mature financial services economy, versus a market like India, which is way more tech forward, where a lot of infrastructure is being built by the government. And in the end, lastly, Southeast Asia, which is probably at the earlier stage of maturity when it comes to the infrastructure side, especially in the tech API layer, right? So that gives us a good, unique view across different kinds of markets, which we use when we invest into these companies.
Yeah, so I guess you can see the stages in the journey towards the growth of digitalization in general and APIs in particular. And so I guess that gives you a view of what we can expect to see. Although there will be some localized regional differences there due to some things that have already been mentioned by previous speakers, like fast-growing economies, young population, digital savvy, and rising middle class, but also with some infrastructure and distance challenges. It's not just the physical distance; it's also what's in between. 7,000 islands in the Philippines. I lost count of how many there are in Indonesia. So there's the last mile challenge for all of these economies in the region. But
Totally.
those challenges also create opportunities because governments aren't going to build everything. There have been some examples of governments building infrastructure. Singapore is obviously quite well established with things like the SingPass digital identity, and in India there's the India Stack, which is the Aadhaar digital identity, UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, which the adoption rate for that has been really very high, hasn't it?
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting in Bangalore right now, funnily, and everywhere that I pay, including like a cup of chai, all the way to a fancy restaurant, you just use UPI. It's amazing. Like, I think the adoption that we've seen in the last 2-3 years in India for digital payments is something that has even outshined like China's adoption of digital payments. So I guess it was a hungry market which sort of leapfrogged the whole, debit cards and credit cards kind of wave. And it's just so amazing, right? Like you don't need to set up any kind of physical infrastructure. You don't need to set up ATMs. India is a massive landmass and with a lot of remote locations and villages, and you can just do everything through the digital economy, right? Like you don't really need to set up any physical infrastructure. So I would say even more relevant for a market like Southeast Asia, where with island nations and archipelagos to start really adopting, digital infrastructure. And I think the governments are really, paying attention. There are some challenges that they face, I think, when they go start implementing these things. But I think we are going to see a big wave of change coming even in Southeast Asia, and we're just at that sort of inflection point now.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on the India example, I think economists often talk about the dangers of government spending, government investment in infrastructure might crowd out private investment, but I don't think that's the case in with UPI, because although it that has been established at a government level, it gives so many opportunities for more companies to do business
Right.
and to start and offer a new service, a more personalized, tailored experience for people. So
Yeah.
um, that adding that layer of infrastructure has enabled so much more and so much more innovation um, for other firms. What are the other sorts of key infrastructure things that you've seen that um, you feel are give the opportunity for firms to come along with new offerings?
Hmm. Yeah, I think just talking. Are you saying talking about Southeast Asia or India right
Yeah,
now?
I was particularly Southeast Asia because I think
Yeah.
India at least has a framework, and although
Yes.
India is very you know, 1.3 billion people, lots of different states, so local conditions. But at least that the um, the regulatory environment and the
It's
infrastructure
homogeneous. Yeah.
is has been applied at the federal level.
Yes.
So it's more consistent across that
Right.
1.3 billion.
Right.
Whereas in Southeast
Right.
Asia, we have different
Right.
conditions
Right.
and different environments.
Yeah. 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 Totally. So I think in Southeast Asia, we're still, way in the infancy of laying down the infrastructure layer from a government perspective, right? So there's a lot of heavy lifting that the startup economy, the digital tech startups are having to do to basically go and build things like account aggregators and, like accessing bank accounts via APIs, right? At least in the financial services side. And that's why like there's a host of companies, like IOConnect, Brancas, etc., who are coming up in this whole open banking space to sort of solve for that problem. A lot of those problems have been solved by the government infrastructure in a market like India, but in markets like Southeast Asia, that sort of very base layer infrastructure doesn't yet exist. Um, will it help within the whole API economy if the government start building this kind of infrastructure? I completely believe so, right? Like I think it's sort of the responsibility of the government to lay the base infrastructure layer, as you mentioned, and then for startups to innovate on top of it. That leads to more innovation. It leads to more competition and less monopolies. If you look at markets like India, where at the start of the whole digital revolution, there were companies like Paytm, which sort of created almost a monopolistic environment of holding wallets and keeping money logged into their ecosystems. And then with the advent of UPI, which is sort of this unified payments interface connecting all banks to within each other, suddenly it allowed companies like Google, PhonePe, Bharat Pay, and so many other startups to come and offer services. And that really increased a lot of competition, which meant a lot of penetration, in the hinterlands of the country, because everyone was trying to grab market share and acquire these merchants and enable them with a QR code, right? So
Hmm.
that was the real acceleration. So the base layer infrastructure, it's quite key that the governments enable that. I think we will see that change happen in a few years' time within markets like Indonesia. Some markets will be further ahead in Southeast Asia, and I try to discount Singapore away because Singapore is obviously way more tech forward and way more emerging and like faster growing, and from a tech adoption perspective, as well as very few people, so very few challenges in terms of implementation. But I'm talking more about markets like Indonesia and the Philippines and Vietnam and Malaysia and Thailand. And bear in mind that each of these markets, as you mentioned, are governed by different federal states, and with very different viewpoints and very different agendas, right? And as a result, like that creates some sort of let's say lethargy when it comes to building this kind of base infrastructure. But this is just the financial services. I think there's just so much more to be done in markets like e-commerce and logistics and mapping and communication and telecom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So picking up on that, there was a recent McKinsey article that categorized sort of three layers of play different sets of players in the API economy. So the infrastructure providers, and we were just talking about that. So UPI in India, IOConnect, Brankas in Southeast Asia are really providing that connection between financial institutions, between and merchants and fintechs and other parts, particularly from a standpoint of payments, but also access to banking and insurance services. But then there are the product augmenters, and the product augmenters are the ones who build on top of that infrastructure. They may not necessarily be a financial institution or a fintech. They're companies that realize, well, they can embed payments into their customer journey, or they can embed other services into that. And so these companies, they actually already have an existing business, but then they add on an additional capability.
Mm.
Do you see what sort of opportunities do you see for firms, and particularly from your standpoint, looking at potential investment opportunities?
Right.
You look
Right.
at companies that you may invest in because they can perhaps leverage this infrastructure and expand.
Right. Right. So when we, when we think about investments, McKinsey has an interesting way of looking at it. I think everyone tends to look at things with a slightly different framework. Our framework internally is divided into three sort of layers when it comes to the API economy, or software as a service category, right? In general, and we call it the infrastructure layer at the bottom, the operations layer in the middle, and the application layer at the top. And this is which is sort of a bit similar, if you think from
Mhm.
McKinsey's perspective, to the product augmentator and the layer on top of it. So when we talk about everything that we've discussed so far is more on the infrastructure layer, on financial services or telco infrastructure, or even communication infrastructure. But then on top of it is the operations layer, where you can enable services which SMEs or these even enterprises can adopt to solve for their own internal operations, right? And things that exist over there look more like a logistics API, right? Where these companies can, instead of, for example, if I'm an e-commerce company sitting in Indonesia and I have to showcase to my customer like when is their parcel going to arrive, I have probably 100 logistic providers on the side who mix and match to get a parcel to a particular island in Indonesia, right? And now instead of me going and directly integrating with each one of these, and a lot of these people have like legacy tech infrastructure and might not even have any digitization, right? There are companies which are coming up to sort of digitize this logistics layer and make it easy to just get the data out and tell the end customer, or be able to showcase to the end customer when exactly is their parcel going to arrive. It sounds very simple and something that developed markets have been seeing for ages now, but this kind of even operations layer enablement doesn't yet exist in a seamless manner in markets like
Mm.
Indonesia, right? Yeah.
So that's a little bit like a marketplace model, but for perhaps not for end customers, but for providers. So
Right.
you use the Grab or Uber example. You have riders looking for drivers and drivers looking for riders.
Yeah.
When you have so many um, fragmented logistics providers across different parts of a country in different locations, they don't have the connectivity with each other, but
Right.
a marketplace that comes and
Yeah.
provides that central point for them to
Yeah.
coordinate actions.
Right.
All of a sudden, gives people who are trying to track or ship something the power to actually predict where it's going to go and to find the local providers who are going to cover that last mile.
Yeah, totally. Actually, even more than a marketplace, like the first wave of companies that we saw solving this problem came with a marketplace kind of a model. And
Hmm.
what that meant was they had to go and convince these logistics providers to use them as an interface between them and the customer.
Hmm.
And what that meant was please share commission with me. And
Yeah.
it changed sort of the business model and economics for the end logistics provider. So there was some of them had shown like kind of a based model, right? But what is interesting now is that with with the advent of API economy, we are seeing startups come up which are basically saying, "Hey, we'll just digitize this. You still connect with your customer. You do your own customer discovery. We are not a marketplace. All we are doing is if let's say a Tokopedia, um, are connected with 1,000 logistics providers on this side, we will just build APIs because we have integrations with each of these people, and it's your choice who you want to use. And we
Hmm.
don't charge any commission on this kind any provider that you choose. All we are charging you, Tokopedia, is a services, a SaaS fee to for this kind of software that we are providing. So it changes to more a pay as you go model for Tokopedia, and the logistics providers, the SMEs, the legacy players, they are much more open to getting digitized and becoming digitized with this new
And
business
a
model.
more democratized model than having
Yes.
some
Yeah.
gatekeeper in the middle. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the operations layer. So you mentioned
Yeah.
the application layer. Where are the opportunities that you see there?
Yeah. Over there, so anything which is customer facing is what we call sits in the application layer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when it's within the organization, that's more operations, and then when it goes outside the organization, it starts going more into the application layer, because this is where you really need to provide a 10x sort of customer experience, a user
Mm-hmm.
experience which is phenomenally better than what they're used to seeing in the past, right? And over
Mm-hmm.
here also, if you pick sectors like e-commerce, you mentioned like allowing SMEs to accept payments from their customers, right? Like we are seeing so many companies come up, um, like Buku Cars, Buku Warung, which are now starting to build. Earlier, they were sitting more in the operations layer and digitizing the operations of these SMEs, but now I'm building solutions like Go Taco, Taco Pay, and these kind of companies which are basically saying, hey, you as an SME have been accepting payments, offline or via bank transfers. Just use our API, expose this link to your customer on a WhatsApp chat, and accept payment via that. And that's a very simple Shopify like business model on the application there. But we also see it in some of the other verticals, in supply chain, in fintech in general, in communication. So if you're an education tech company, you're a teacher who has been teaching students offline, and part of now an education tech company, suddenly you have to go online thanks to the pandemic, right? And there needs to be a communication layer, a video streaming infrastructure, a one-on-one live video call infrastructure in between the edutech and the student, right? And that's again sits more on the application layer for us, right? And there are lots of opportunities over here because the moment you start touching the consumer in these developing emerging markets, right? Suddenly there are very new challenges that you start hitting. Um, so if you were a company, and there are a lot of these phenomenal companies that are presenting in API days, like a Twilio or a Vonage or a Agora, etc., in the communication layer. If you were a US company which is now entering a market like Indonesia, and you had to enable this communication layer in Indonesia, you would suddenly run into challenges like low bandwidth, low ARPU.
Mm.
The startup that you're selling to, or the tech company you're selling to, is just saying like, look, this is great, and I would love to use your API, but the challenge is my customer only ends up paying me $1 a month. How do I pay you, $2 a month for enabling this kind of a communication layer, right? And
Hmm.
so that creates this kind of opportunity for local startups to start building more unique, more ground up, more relevant sort of solutions for the local emerging markets. And we are seeing, good sort of activity, startup activity in the early stages on that side as well.
Great. Listen, Nikhil, I can't believe 25 minutes have gone by and we've
Yeah.
barely scratched the surface of this. We're going to have to invite you back at API Days India next month to dig into this deeper. Thanks very much for sharing your insights into the opportunities in API investment in this part of the world. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having me, John. Yeah.